everybody. Good morning. It's good to see each one of you here with us worshiping this morning. Welcome to those of you who are joining us on live stream as well. We're so glad that you're with us this morning, and we hope you can come visit us sometime in person really soon. It's a good morning here at First Temple. We're looking forward to a great morning of worship. If you're a guest with us today, thanks for being here. My name is Ryan. I'm the teaching and young adult pastor, and I'll be outside these doors today after the service. If you want to come by and say hello, I'd love to shake your hand and get to know your name. We've been in a series over the last 5-6 weeks called All Things New. And this series comes to us from the book of Revelation. It's from Revelation 21, verse 5. It's the next to last chapter of the Bible, and we can kind of picture this scene of Jesus standing at the end of time as we know it, proclaiming this word over all of creation. Jesus says, I am making everything new. And so in this series, we're talking about all of the things that Jesus is making new. We're talking about how Jesus is giving us new life, about how he is creating a new heaven and a new earth, about how he has put a new song in our mouth, how he's given us a new name, how he's given us a new mind. And then today we take one more step and we talk together about the fact that Jesus is going to give us a new body. What's going to happen to my body? Have you ever asked that question before? What is going to happen to my body? This is a question that we ask when pivotal moments of life are coming up, when perhaps we're about to have a big surgery and they're going to rearrange some things inside. Perhaps it's before the delivery of a baby, perhaps a cancer treatment, or maybe a new diagnosis has been given or new medicine is about to commence. And we have this question, what is going to happen to my body? It's an anxious question, right? It's a question where we are not sure exactly what the future is going to hold. Well, it's a question that's been asked for a long, long time. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we see Paul mentioning this very same question. Verse 35 reads like this. Paul says, but someone will ask, he predicts, how are the dead raised, and with what kind of body will they come? What's going to happen to my body? Paul had been talking with them about the fact that the resurrection of Jesus was changing everything, and the fact that every person who is a follower of Jesus will also be raised one day, that the grave will not be our end, but we will live forever with Christ. And he says, you probably have the question, what is that going to be like? What will happen to my body? We ask this question not just about big life events that are coming up, but when we peer over the edge of death as well. When we stare into the great unknown and wonder what our future is going to hold, we wonder to ourselves, what is going to happen to my body? Well, today Paul's going to answer this question in a number of ways through this passage, 1 Corinthians 15. We'll read the passage in several pieces. Let's begin in verse 36, right after he asks the question. Paul's response is this: how foolish! What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed, perhaps of wheat or of something else. But God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives its own body. So Paul's first response to the question, what is going to happen to my body, is simple, and yet it's quite profound. He tells us that we will have a body. In God's future age, on the other side of death, have you processed and thought about the reality that we will have a body? Now that seems simple. We sort of want to run past it, but we need to pause and linger for just a moment, because this is a message that we have not often heard. I remember when I was growing up in the church, there was a song that we used to sing and that I used to love. It's a real toe tapper, okay? It's called I'll Fly Away, right? And you know some of the lyrics of that song. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away. You have to say not over, but or, because then it rhymes with the next line, okay? To a home on God's celestial shore, there's the rhyme, I'll fly away. And y'all, that's a real toe tapper, but it is not very good theology. So you see, the song pictures the moment when we die and when our body is put in the ground, and then our soul flies away to a disembodied place called heaven. I'll fly away. I am identified with the immaterial part of me. My body is in the ground, and I am the real part of me that was trapped in that body, who is now flying away to be with Jesus forever. And right here, Paul says, no. You will have a body. You see, most of us imagine life and death as sort of a two-stage process. There's life on earth, and then there's afterlife in heaven. It's not complicated, right? Life on earth, and then afterlife in heaven. And yet, the Bible actually describes a three-step process instead. Let's take a look at this. The first stage is life on earth, okay, just as we would expect. But the second stage is after life in heaven, okay, still going as we would expect it, but here's the key, awaiting the resurrection. This verse right here in Luke 23 is when Jesus is on the cross and he turns to the thief who is next to him and he says to him, surely this day you will be with me in paradise. It's a promise to us that our final breath on earth will be followed up in the presence of Jesus, but that's not the end of the story. We are still awaiting in that stage the final resurrection. And so stage 3, this final moment, is eternal life in the new heaven and new earth. It's a material, physical world that God is going to bring about in the end. I'm thankful that we sang just a few moments ago that song, Heaven Came Down and Glory Filled My Soul. There's a song that is great theology. See, a few weeks ago, we talked about new heaven and new earth. We read Revelation 21 together, and we remarked about the fact that it does not describe the story of souls ascending to heaven. That gets it backwards, right? That instead it talks about heaven coming down to earth. Heaven came down and glory filled my soul. The story of the Bible ends with the heavens coming down to earth and Jesus transforming everything and promising that he will make all things new. And so this new heaven and this new earth is not a spiritual disembodied place, but it's a physical, material reality. And Paul tells us, you will have a body. So in this three-stage process, death is what transitions us from stage 1 to stage 2, and then that final resurrection is what transitions us from stage 2 to stage 3. And if our imagination stops at stage 2, just after life with Jesus, then we are probably imagining ourselves as a disembodied spirit hanging out with Jesus for all of eternity. And yet that is not the plot of the scriptures. There is a final resurrection where the dead will be raised in Christ in the new heaven and the new earth, and you will have a new body. New Testament scholar N.T. Wright talks about how we put a lot of focus here today on the church about life after death, and that's fine. But he talks about how this third stage in the new heavens and new earth, we really ought to think of as life after death. There's a philosopher and theologian, John Polkinghorne, who gives an image that helps me kind of wrap my mind around it. It makes it more concrete. I love this quote. Here you go. He says, God will download our software onto his hardware until the time when he gives us new hardware to run the software again. Isn't that great? So one day your hardware, your body is going to expire, right? And yet we are assured that don't worry, God will keep you safe. He will hang on to your software, okay? Until that one moment in time when he gives you a new body, he gives you new hardware, and then he will download the software back onto your new hardware again. This is the story of the Bible. And Paul says, you will have a body. And friends, that's good news. Because as we age throughout life, we get to certain points in time, right, when our bodies don't work like they used to. When all the things that we used to be able to do and we used to take pleasure in, we can't do those same activities before. We have to scale back. We have to take it easy. And yet Paul comes to us this morning with good news, and he says, friends, you are going to have a a new body. And it's going to work exactly like it was meant to work in the very beginning, and yet it's going to be even bigger and even better. So get ready. You will have a new body. As Paul goes on in this passage, he tells us a little more about what this new body is going to be like. We pick up in verse 39. He writes, "Not all flesh is the same. People have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. There are also heavenly bodies, and there are earthly bodies. But the splendor of the heavenly bodies is one kind, and the splendor of the earthly bodies is another. The sun has one kind of splendor, the moon another, and the stars another. And star differs from star in splendor." So Paul makes a contrast here, but it's not between body and spirit like we might expect him to say. We might think he would say, well, you have a body now, but one day you will be a spirit in heaven. But that's not what he says. Instead, the contrast is not between body and spirit, it's between kinds of bodies. And he gives us a very easy example that we can understand. He says, look, humans have one kind of body, but birds have another, and animals have another, and fish have a fourth kind of bodies. He says, in case you haven't noticed, your body looks a little bit different than a pelican's body, right? And a starfish is a little bit different than the pelican. And the alligator is just completely different altogether. And in the same way that there are different types of bodies on earth, that the earthly body you have today, the categories by which you understand what it means to have an earthly body are going to be completely different from what it means to have a heavenly body. We would love to know what that means, right? We would love to know what we're going to be capable of. Am I going to be able to lift 1,000 pounds with ease? Will I be able to eat at Chick-fil-A every day and just have no harmful effects? Because after all, Chick-fil-A is going to be open every day, right? And in the future age, right? Am I going to be able to run at the speed of sound? We want to know what our bodies are going to be capable of. We don't get answers to all of those questions, but we're told that it's a completely different type of body. He talks about the splendor of the heavens, and he says, you know how the sun has one kind of splendor, and the moon has another kind, and the stars have a third kind of splendor. He says, well, the splendor of your earthly body will be nothing compared to the splendor of your heavenly body. He goes on in verse 42 to 44 to tell us a little bit more. He says, so will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable, and it is raised imperishable. He's using this image here of a seed that's sown in the ground, right? And so our bodies will be sown, and then something new will come up. And so they're sown perishable. None of us know what's going to happen on the way home today. Accidents can happen in a moment. We can be gone. And yet our new heavenly body will be different than that. It will be imperishable. It will be indestructible. The body is sown perishable and raised imperishable. He goes on in verse 43 to say, it is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, and it is raised a spiritual body. It's interesting, that term right there, spiritual body, is almost a contradiction in our minds. Right? Now, in Western thought, we have been trained to think of spiritual things as immaterial, right? Spiritual means immaterial, and physical means material. But these categories do not come to us from the Bible. If you trace them all the way back in their lineage of thought, they go all the way back to the philosopher Plato, okay? Who taught that the bodily, physical, was inferior to the spiritual. It's seeped into our imagination. It shapes the way that we read the text. But in the categories of the scriptures, that there can be a spiritual body. It's not immaterial. The spiritual is flesh, just like our bodies are here today. And so Paul says, you are going to have a body, and yet not one that is prone to decay. It is a body that is completely imperishable. We get a picture of what this is going to be like in the Gospels. There's a story that comes to us from John chapter 20, and this is a moment where Jesus has just risen from the dead, and he has appeared to Mary Magdalene, And Mary went to the disciples and told them that she had seen Jesus. And they're huddled together in this room. We pick up now in John 20, verse 19. The text reads, "On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and he stood among them and said, 'Peace be with you.' And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord." This text here gives us two clues about what our resurrected bodies are like by showing us what Jesus' body was like when he was resurrected. Jesus was the first fruits of new creation. His resurrected body gives us a template or an idea of what our bodies will be like one day as well. The two details that we can point to in this passage are, first of all, that Jesus moves through locked doors, right? The disciples are huddled together out of fear, and the door is locked, and Jesus is all of a sudden just there. Now, he didn't pick the lock or anything like that. He just sort of appeared out of nowhere, right? And it's amazing. Jesus' resurrected body is able to do things that earthly bodies should not be able to do. That's the first clue we get. And then the second is that as soon as the disciples are thinking, well, Jesus must be some kind of ghost, right? Because he just appeared through the wall. They expect to be able to put their hand right through him. And yet Jesus says, "Look at my scars." And he points to his scars on his hands and in his side. And as they touch those scars, they realize that Jesus is no disembodied spirit. He's no ghost. That Jesus has a body. And yet it's a body that still marks the story of his earthly life. And so the two clues that we have about what our resurrected bodies will be like is that on the one hand, our bodies will be able to do things that are currently unimaginable to us. Jesus is showing up in a locked room. And then secondly, that our bodies will still share the stories of our earthly lives. Jesus still has his scars. And so these images can really come together for us. And the best metaphor that I can put together for you of what our bodies will one day be like is this, is that we will be like Superman, but with scars. Superman, but with scars. You remember Clark Kent, right? You remember how he's a journalist for the Daily Planet? Here's a picture of Clark and Superman. You know, I never really understood how this was a good disguise for Superman. Okay? Never really understood it. I mean, I'm just saying, if I accidentally left my glasses at home this morning and I showed up in a cape, I'm pretty sure y'all would still be able to figure out that it was me, okay? But for some reason, this works for Clark Kent. People have no idea that he is Superman. They haven't figured it out yet. And so we can talk about Superman. We could also talk about Wonder Woman instead. And it works too because she has the same thing going on. Wonder Woman has an alter ego called Diana Prince. You see them sort of side by side here. Again, horrible disguise. I'm not sure how these superheroes thought these disguises were going to do any good for them. And yet somehow it works, okay? So Clark Kent is in the newsroom, right? So he gets the stories right off the bat about things that are going wrong in the city. And he just sort of slips away to the bathroom, right? Changes clothes. And everybody's wondering, where's Clark? I don't know. But, oh, by the way, there's Superman every time. What a coincidence, okay? And Superman flies off to save the day. Superman, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. See, we don't know what our heavenly bodies are going to be like, what they're going to be capable of, but we do know that they're going to be transformed. That just like Clark Kent somehow transforms into Superman, there's going to be a transformation that takes place within us as well. And that heavenly body will be imperishable. And there will be no kryptonite that can even touch us. And yet, Superman is only half of this image. Because you see, the resurrected Jesus, yes, he's moving through locked doors, but he also has his scars. I don't know if you've noticed before, but I have some significant scarage on my left arm right here. When I was about 1 year old, my grandmother was giving me a bath, and she found a lump in my left arm. And we went to see the doctor and found out that it was a tumor. Thankfully, it was benign. But I had it removed at age 1. They couldn't get all of it, though. Some of it was embedded in the nerve, and they said this might grow back one day. And sure enough, it did. So at 18, I had another surgery, and at 22, I had a third. And so as a result, I've got a pretty gnarly scar that takes up about this much of my arm. So I've often wondered to myself if in this future age, with the new body, if I will still have this scar. I mean, after all, Jesus still had his scars, right? And I can't really know, of course, but I've come to believe that I might. And it's interesting because I think when a lot of us imagine the future age, we picture a fresh start and we picture no imperfections. And yet here is Jesus, and he still has his scars. And so personally, I've come to the place where I've embraced this reality of not needing to be embarrassed, but embracing the reality that this might always be part of who I am. And you see, we all have scars. Scars are not always physical. Scars are really signs of what we have overcome in life. And we've all overcome something. So that means that all of us have scars. Some of them are physical, but some of them we carry in other ways. And I've begun to wonder if the resurrected Jesus still had his scars, then I wonder if my body and if your future body will in some way carry the scars of what we've experienced on earth. And that might be unsettling, but I hope I could encourage us this morning to think that it doesn't need to be. Because here's the beauty of it, is that our scars tell the story of who we are. Our scars tell the story of who we are. And so God apparently does not feel the need to erase our past in its entirety. He feels the need to redeem our past, because when we are redeemed, we can proclaim the greatness of what we have overcome and what he has brought us through. So hear this word this morning, that Jesus has not come to erase our story, but to redeem it. Your scars tell the story of who you are. So we have this image of what are our bodies going to be like. On the one hand, we're going to kind of be like Superman. And on the other hand, we're going to have scars. As we think about the present day implications of this future body, I wanted to challenge you to think about three things this morning. The first one is this. This idea of a new body should challenge us, first of all, to take care of our bodies, right? So if, as we've learned this morning, our bodies are not temporary disposable containers for our soul, okay, but they're an essential part of who we are, that we will have a body forever, then that means that we ought to learn to take care of our bodies. It means that we need to consider what we put into our body, whether that be substances or whether that be food. We need to think about how we take care of our body, like when it comes to exercise, when it comes to taking care of ourselves with health care. We need to pay attention to how we think about our body, that we need to protect ourselves from jealousy over other people who have different, or we might think better bodies than us, that we need to learn to be grateful for the body that God has given us. And yes, it's true that we will have a new body one day, but that should in no way, shape, or form devalue the current body that we have. The future body that we will have actually tells us that God values bodies. And so maybe we should learn to value bodies as well. We should take care of our bodies. The second way this idea of a new body should challenge us is that we should meet the physical needs of others. You know, sometimes we can get this idea in our head that God only cares about the spiritual things of life and that he doesn't care a whole lot about the physical things of life. I think that's a problem. I think that idea comes from this expectation that one day that we're going to leave this physical world behind and we're going to go away to a spiritual, disembodied place. But if we've said this morning that that's not the story of the scriptures, that in reality there will be a new heavens and a new earth where we will live in a material world forever with God in a new body, then what that tells us is that the physical matters to God as well. God cares about both the spiritual and the physical, that we don't need to choose between them. And so when we encounter physical needs around us in our life, we don't just say, well, that's too bad. I'm sorry that you're suffering, but let me tell you about heaven one day and how you won't have to suffer anymore. Let me steer you towards the spiritual. Yes, we care about the spiritual, but we also care about the physical as well, because both matter to God. And so I wonder this morning, what are some physical needs that are right around you that you have seen this past week? There's someone in your life that has financial needs that you could step in and meet. Is there a neighbor that needs transportation, maybe to a doctor's appointment? Are there people in your life that could use a hot meal? Are there extra things that you have around at your house that you're not using anymore, and you could gather those things up and donate them to people in our community who are just trying to get by? If we are going to always have a body, then God cares about the physical. And so we should try to meet the physical needs around us as well. The third and final thing that this new body challenges us to think about is that we need to come to terms with our scars. Not just the physical scars, but the metaphorical ones, right? The things that we've overcome in life that have made us who we are. Sometimes we want to hide these things. And yet, what if they're going to be part of us forever? What if they're forever going to tell the story of what we have overcome and who God has made us to be? If that's the case, then maybe we should start to tell that story now, right? Maybe we should start to showcase and feature our scars, because they are what made us who we are. Did you know that Superman is the 5th most popular superhero in the world today? I think that's kind of amazing, because, he's Superman, right? Superman can do everything, right? He can lift up an entire building. He can fly at the speed of light. Superman is the 5th most popular superhero in the world today. You want to know why? Superman is boring. When you can do everything, when you have no limitations as long as there's no kryptonite around, then it actually doesn't make for interesting television. You want to know who the number one superhero is in the world today? That would be Spider-Man, okay? It would be Spider-Man. You want to know why Spider-Man is so popular? Because Spider-Man's known tragedy. Spider-Man comes from a broken family. Spider-Man has overcome. Spider-Man has scars. You see, Superman has no scars, not a blemish from head to toe. We can relate to Spider-Man. And so if you have scars, that's okay, because that means that people can relate to you too. So rather than trying to hide those scars this week, I would encourage you to embrace them and to remember that our scars tell the story of who we are. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this truth that you are making all things new. God, we're learning there's many facets of it. And we thank you for the truth that we will have a new body. As our body aches, we look forward to that reality of being made new. God, help us to think about today the reality that you care about not just the spiritual, but also the physical as well. Would you make us to be people who feel the same way? Would you make us to be people who are your hands and your feet in the world and who meet the needs around us? We love you, Lord. Thank you for making us new. In your name we pray. Amen.